Well, hey everyone, hope you're doing well when you watch this video. This video is about population changes. Here are some of the big ideas that I'm going to try to go over in this video. I'm going to talk about genetic variations and how they happen through mutations, kind of define mutations and what those are. Evolution, we're going to dive into the huge concept of evolution and investigate Charles Darwin and how he developed his theory and how it doesn't line up with the Bible and how it possibly, parts of it can line up with the Bible. Evolution is influenced by natural selection, so I will help you understand natural selection. And then adaptations, we'll define them and understand how they help organisms to survive in their ecosystems. So if we were together in a classroom setting, I would have you look at, your classes and kind of tally up who has what trait. But what are some visible traits that vary among you, and your family, or your family? Well, here are some examples of different traits, physical characteristics that we see. First off, attached earlobes or unattached. I have attached with that. Can you roll your tongue? Some people can like do the four-leaf clover or flip it. It's weird. Smiling. Do you have those dimples when you smile? I'm thinking about one specific person right now, which whom will remain nameless. Handedness. Are you a righty or a lefty? I love baseball. Y'all know that. And it's a huge advantage, especially when you're young in high school, even in college, even if you're a lefty. My mom's a southpaw. We call those lefties. And so it would have been sweet, like crazy sweet. But nope, God wanted me to be a right hand. He obviously knows what he's doing, so it's all good. Freckles. Anyone have freckles. Curly hair or uncurly hair. That is a trait, based upon genetics, DNA. This is a cool activity. Some of y'all might remember this from previous years. You may have been with me, but you close your eyes and put your hands together like interlocking, like the all sweet holding hands moment. So close your eyes and put your hands together. If you look down, let me see if I can do a good video here with this. If you look at your hand, is your left thumb or your right thumb on top? And so for me, my left's on top. And so if I flip it, it feels weird. And there's actually been scientific studies done that this is also influenced by genetics, which is crazy to even think about, but that is. Also, color blindness. You can see that guys have a greater chance of being colorblind because color blindness is on the X chromosome. That's also a trait. I knew a student who was colorblind. He got the fancy glasses, which is amazing that science was even able to develop those. But these are examples of different traits that we see that are based upon genetic variations. So everything comes from genes, DNA. DNA is the blueprint of life. Good things and bad things. I want to show you a picture here. I hope you're not eating. But this, especially like cottage cheese or any, no, I'll just stop. But this is MRSA, MRSA, methicillin resistant Staphylococcus aureus. This is a superbug. We've been learning how life changes. And so this is an example of how life changes. This bacterium was not around forever. It actually developed through, many people would argue, our irresponsible and overuse of antibiotics. I was sick a couple of weeks ago, just a common cold. I was checked out. And one of the doctors prescribed for me an antibiotic. He's like, oh, well, this will help you if you want it. But I knew, he told me it was a virus. He told me it was a common cold. That antibiotic would have done nothing for me. When I was young, I took a lot of medicine. Sometimes I needed it. Maybe sometimes I didn't. But our overuse of antibiotics, this is from the CDC. The CDC is getting a lot of attention, rightly so, these days, of course. And this is how antibiotics resistance happens. Some bacteria are just naturally resistant. Why are they just naturally resistant? Well, they have different DNA. When antibiotics kill bacteria causing illness, they also kill the good bacteria. And so therefore the antibiotic resistant bacteria are left back. They don't die. And so now they have like free reign, free resources, and they just multiply and divide like crazy. And then they also transfer those genes through plasmids. You don't have to know that for this course, but through plasmids to other bacterium around them. And so they transfer that genetic information. So genes really cause evolution to happen. Evolve means to change. I love comics. Zit's right here. Wouldn't it be nice not to have to get up and eat? Some of y'all might, try. I don't know. I can't eat while laying down. It's just asking for trouble. So Darwin. Many people, for those who have been in biology, have heard about Charles Darwin. This is him as a young man, roughly 20 something years old, and he was invited to go on a voyage of 5 years. And on this trip, he loved nature. And on this trip, he's making observations. He's coming on the trip not just with his own thoughts, but with all these other thoughts. He's read a lot of books. He's been influenced by some challenging thoughts of his day. He was brought up. He actually studied to be a minister. Not many people know that, but he actually studied to be a minister in the Church of England. And he forsook that, wanted to develop and devote his life in the scientific realm of naturalism, which is explaining everything without God. And he's going on this voyage because he loves nature, and he's sketching and taking notes, and he's seeing all of this change. He's read about Charles Lyell and James Hutton's work, and how the Earth could possibly be really old at this time of life. Only people believe it's really young, and Christians, again, some think it's young, some think it's old. Brilliant people on both sides. Fun debate to have, but not for the time right now. And so he's traveling around the Earth 5 years. But his most famous stop is the Galapagos Islands. This is really where his theory starts to take shape. And so there's Charles Robert Darwin, and he was interested in geology and natural history. And so he realized that organisms are adapted to the environment that they live. This was a little sketch of the ship that he was on. And so it wasn't like a cruise ship or anything. He got really sick multiple times on this journey. He met some wonderful people. He met some unkind people. He loved places. He hated places. He experienced earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. It was a trip of a lifetime, of course. 5 years traveling around the planet. Would you do it? Would you do it? And that's just another picture. That's just a picture of the Galapagos Islands. And you can see how they all are right there. And so he saw really three things aboard the Beagle. He saw that species vary globally. The species are different based upon where they live. They vary locally, which means he saw lots of finches. I believe I'm going to show you a picture here in a second. But the finches, their beaks are specifically shaped for a specific type of food. And so he was like, well, why are these birds around? At the time, people believed that God specifically created each individual species. But if you read Genesis, it doesn't say that. In Genesis, it said God created according to their kind. And so Christians, of course, now argue not species, kind. And so within a kind, there could be change. And the species vary over time, which is relating to fossils. So in biology, evolution refers specifically to changes in the genetic makeup of populations over time. And a population is a group of a single species. There's a very pixelated picture of emperor penguins, but that's a population. So evolution happens in populations. How does it happen? It has to have new input of information. It has to have different information. And so that information happens through changes in DNA or mutations. Mutations are any changes in the nucleotide sequences. Remind yourself of biology, but there's 4 bases in DNA, right? A, T, C, and G. And depending upon how those bases are arranged, determine what the code is, the blueprint of you, and that code goes out to proteins, and that determines how proteins are made. So for example, a very common one is hair color. We have a certain amount of melanin that's produced in our hair. But depending upon your DNA, you might produce more of that protein or less of that protein or a different shade of that protein. And therefore, your DNA determines what you physically look like. So mutations can be bad, they can be good, or they can have no effect. But mutations both create and help maintain genetic variation. Evolution, though, needs a whole lot of input from good mutations. And what's interesting, if you do some research on it, is that most mutations are neutral or bad. There's very few that are actually good. And so to believe that over millions and millions of years, there was these millions and millions and millions of great mutations takes a little bit of faith. I wouldn't say a little bit, probably like a lot of faith to believe that that could happen. But here's the general flow of natural selection. So this is what Darwin argued. Darwin argued that evolution happens by natural selection. Change over time happens by natural selection. So there's far more individuals that are born that can survive. Offspring tend to resemble their parents, but they're not identical. They have variations, they have adaptations. They're not the same. You're not a clone of your parents. You've been given different variations through the process of meiosis. And so differences among individuals affect their chances of survival and reproduction, which will increase the frequency of favorable traits in the next generation. So this is survival of the fittest. So first off, there's a struggle to survive. And second off, there's a survival of the fittest. Okay, I will email you this table. I want it done by next week. I'll tell you specifics in an email, but here's some words that are related to natural selection: overproduction, competition, variation, adaptation, survival of the fittest, and speciation. And so basically Darwin, influenced by all these thinkers, realized it's hard to live, not only for humans at the time of him and now, of course, but also just with organisms in the world that are not, humans. And so he saw there's a struggle to survive, and some organisms have just a natural advantage. They've been given certain variations in their DNA that are better, that enable them to better survive and reproduce in the environments that they are living in. And so Darwin's formulating all these thoughts. Natural selection, yes, it does work. That's John Deere. Nothing runs like a deer. I haven't seen this, but I have seen people like race on lawnmowers. It's interesting. So this is just kind of a picture from a biology textbook, but this is how kind of natural selection works on land. So there's a struggle for existence. So let's say all these grasshoppers, and different ones have different colors just due to variation, DNA changes, right? Well, the ones that blend in this environment have a higher fitness level. They're more likely to survive and reproduce and pass those traits on to their offspring. And so the tan ones are food for the birds. And so this is just kind of another image that says that, but it differs based upon the environment. And that one, the green ones, if we're talking about like sand, clay type environment, the green ones would not be at an advantage. So it depends upon the environment. So Darwin's seeing all this, and Darwin's noticing that species are specifically adapted to where they live. And he's struggling to reconcile his upbringing and what he's seeing. And of course, he has a faulty view of Genesis, which is a huge issue, of course. And so this is his sketch about finches, Galapagos Islands. And then, this large one, what kind of food do you think it would eat? Would it eat like small insects? Well, no, this would be adapted to eat really large seeds, hard seeds, strong. So Darwin's thinking about all these variations, and he comes up with descent with modification, or change over time coming from one common ancestor. And so this is a sketch from his notebook. You can see over here that maybe this is a common ancestor, and we branch here and branch here. Modern day science has actually challenged this. They've seen that sometimes species do crossbreed, and those crossbreds are fertile. It's interesting to think about, but that's just Darwin's thoughts on the situation. So he saw adaptations. Adaptations are favored traits that evolves through natural selection. So adaptations also describe the process that produces the trait. This is the peppered moth story. I'm sure some of y'all remember from the past. But the Industrial Revolution, right? The peppered moths were white, blend in with the lichens on the trees. Industrial Revolution, all this smoke, pollutions, contaminating wildlife. And so eventually over time, peppered moths slowly turned to be black. There was black ones before the Industrial Revolution, but they were very low in number because they were not at an advantage. However, the environment changed, and therefore their DNA was now favored, and so therefore their population went up. But so here's some examples of adaptations. They increase an organism's chance of survival. First off, here are the finches. These are structural adaptations. You can kind of look at this graphic here and pause the video if you want to see, okay, these seeds correspond to these type of these bills correspond to these type of seeds or insects or fruit. There's behavioral adaptations. Echolocation is an example that bats use. Emperor penguins, functional adaptations. They can dive crazy deep and hold their breath for crazy long. They trap most of their heat through their nostrils. They can speed their heart rate up to 200 and slow it down to 20 during a long dive, which is like love dub. Love dub. It's crazy. It might be a little faster than that, but give or take. So Darwin's coming up with this theory, and he comes up with this common descent. So in biology, I'll take the webcam away, but in biology, there's this tree of life according to atheistic naturalistic biology. And so Darwin proposed that over many generations, adaptations could cause successful species to evolve into new species. That's called speciation. He also proposed that living species are descended with modification, with changes from one common ancestor. And so this is the huge sticking point between the Bible and evolution. The Bible, yeah, sure, we would believe in changes within a kind, but evolution teaches that there are no such things as kinds. We all came from one single place. And the Bible's like, no, there's definitely separate kinds. The Bible teaches that human beings are their separate kind. We don't share an ancestry with primates, which is what evolution would argue based upon genetic, correlations and percentages that were the same and traits and stuff. We would actually argue, no, God said that He created us from the dust, and so we are not related as far as with descent from common ancestors. Adam and Eve were not some ape-like humans. Christianity would teach that Adam and Eve were brilliant, fully human, and then sin has slowly brought, us down due to the curse that it brings. And so that's just a little biblical worldview for you. So what does the Bible actually say? Well, this is from Answers in Genesis. I'm not going to read all this in the video. If you want to, please pause it right now. I'll take the webcam away if I haven't already. But how is this not the same as evolution? I just want to read you this one little part right here. Evolutionary concepts of descent with modification ultimately require the addition of new information. The biblical model does not require new information. In fact, the biblical model is confirmed by the fact that we see a loss of information as these species adapt to various environments. This is what we would expect as the world continues to deteriorate after the fall. So we believe that God created everything with all the genetic potential, and within that genetic potential that He created, we see the changes that we observe today within kinds. And so, briefly, what's the evidence for evolution as far as from a naturalistic perspective? First off, fossil record is Exhibit A. This is the Glyptodon. Hope I'm saying that right. Darwin found this fossil related to armadillo. Huge fossil, would stand almost as high as us, and it crazy big, ice age, and so ice age time. And so the fossil record, Darwin's seen all these different fossils, and the dinosaur fossils are being discovered around his time, and he's putting all these thoughts together, and we see change we see changes in the fossil record. We would also, though, and this is highly debated in Christian circles, transitional fossils. So if you're going from species A to species B, you're going to need some sort of transitional form, and they're very rare. One example is called Tiktaalik. Life came from the sea, according to evolution, atheistic evolution, and so eventually you would have to have some intermediate form, one that has like feet and was able to walk onto land. And so here's an example of kind of like the evolution of the limb here. So you start with the fin, and the bone structure is very similar, and so you go to that. Christianity does have an answer to this. We don't have time to get into it, but I encourage you to look it up on Christian websites. Homologous structures that are shared by related species and that have been inherited from a common ancestor. And so you can see that we generally have the same type of structure. We have many little bones, a couple larger bones, and large bone. You can see a cat has a similar structure. A whale has a similar structure. A bat has a similar structure. This is homologous structures. There's also structures that are called analogous, which means they have the same function but not structure. For example, wings. These are different types of wings. They all have a similar structure. Also, something that's been pointed out throughout the years as an evidence for evolution according to naturalism is vestigial structures. Vestigial structures are basically structures that are believed to be leftovers from evolution. For a long time, the whale pelvic bones were considered this. They're just leftovers from evolution for when whales were on land. Hopefully you did that assignment, of course. And that's actually been disproved by Christian authors and stuff. The whale pelvic bone helps it reproduce and helps it be successful in that. Also, the appendix for humans. The appendix for humans is, bottom right. If you ever have pain, bottom right quadrant of your abdomen, sharp pain, tender to touch, fever, you might have appendicitis. But the appendix was like, oh, this is just a leftover from evolution. But no, science has found that no, it houses good bacteria. So if you've ever had that really rough sickness, not going to get into the graphic details here, but that bacteria inside the appendix helps to recolonize your intestinal tract, and you need those microbes to be healthy. Not only that, in embryological development, how you develop as an embryo, for you can see here that we all look similar. I laugh because I remember being told when I was young that these were fish gills in humans, and they're not. That's been disproved for a long time. But we do. We look similar. You can see that's you. That's baby you right there. And so, but finally, the only other evidence, and the one that's mostly looked at when we're talking about relationships as far as naturalism goes, and when we try to figure out how closely related organisms are, again, from a naturalistic perspective, we look at DNA. How closely are we related in DNA? How alike is our DNA? We've been able to sequence DNA in many different species on the planet. And so we look at that. We look at DNA and how closely we're related. So from your pages in your textbook 315 and 318, they discuss invasive species. I want to close with this because this will be another assignment due next week. But invasive species are species that are new or are introduced to an area. For example, the red lionfish, the Australian spotted jellyfish, the green mussel. And so you can see, read here about why our invasive species are so destructive, because this also changes the gene pool. Sometimes extinctions can happen and species can change, not just by mutation, but also the introduction of different species. And so your assignment will be to pick one invasive species that's in the marine system in Florida and answer these questions. And I'll email out this form so you can fill it out. It'll be due next week. But here is the website. The link will be in the description. Hopefully it will work and be good. But here are some examples here that you can pick one of these and do that little research and answer them to me. But until we talk again, guys, I hope this video was helpful. I hope you're doing well, enjoying, or trying to enjoy. I know we all have so much on our minds these days, but please take a moment to enjoy your family and your loved ones and thank God for them. Get into His Word, good word. If you're looking for brief devotionals, I do have devotionals on this channel, a good word. They're just there to help you, give you some good news from God's good word to us, His Bible. And so I just pray that until we talk again, you remain healthy, you remain strong and diligent in your studies. And I'll talk to you later. God bless, guys.